Hey, worship teams, thanks so much for joining us. You are watching Worship Team Training Hangout. Man, we are so excited that you guys are with us. And today is a great day for you if you're doing your taxes, or maybe not so. You got your taxes done, good for you. We did, so we're feeling great. Hope you're doing it too. So, you are watching the series premiere of Season 3, Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs. And man, today we got a fantastic show. We have Jadon Lavik that's going to be sharing his heart and his soul with you guys. We're going to have some great conversations. We want to say a special thank you for all you guys following us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Instagram. Am I leaving out any other social medias? Also, want to stay in tune coming up for our next episode. We're going to have Dwayne Moore, Ross King coming up later this April. And also, we still have our long-awaited music lesson with Stephanie Kelly. And she's not going to be with us today. So the same with Timmons and Swift. They got some other things going on, but we're just going to hang out with Tony and Jadon here. We want to also just let you know about the Worship Team Training Workshop coming up in Rhode Island, May 15, 16, and also on our webinar with Sally Morgenthaler. We've updated that to May the 19th, Tuesday, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. We got a great crew. We got over 124 worship leaders signed up, so you can't miss it. Be sure to follow the link and register. If you got questions today for the show, please Twitter us at WorshipTT or hashtag WorshipTeamHangout. Well, I want to say a special hello to Tony. How you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm sorry that when I suggested Jadon, I had no idea he would repel all of the other hosts.
Have that effect on people.
That's okay. He's doing great so far, and you've instructed him wisely. So I thank you for bringing him on the show. Tony Guerrero, everybody, beautiful person. And so we want to introduce our special guest today. Jadon Lavik is an accomplished singer-songwriter with 2 top 10 AC hits, What If and Come Thou Fount, 3 number 1s at Inspirational Radio, Father, What If, and Come Thou Fount again, and 3 Dove Award nominations and an ASCAP Songwriter Award recipient. He and his wife Stephanie run an awesome nonprofit ministry called Better Together Ministries that does multi-church unifying events, like a Christmas thing they do and an Easter thing, and it's a marriage conference that also they offset the funds by doing golf tournaments to raise funds. And so, Jadon, we're going to talk about your golf swing in a second. Currently, he's worship pastor at Shoreline Church in San Clemente, and also he's gone to seminary at Talbot Biola University, and just released an EP, a new EP, Summer Sessions on iTunes. Be sure to check that out. He's got 3 kids, 1 on the way, 2 boys, Laird, Noah, and 1 girl, Lily, who's 2 years old. He's a golfer, surfer, songwriter, worship leader, and friend. How about that for an introduction? Everyone, please welcome Jadon Lavik.
Yeah.
How are you, Jadon?
Have me on. I think you said it all, so my work's done here. No, it's great to be with you guys and learn more about what you guys are doing. And Tony and I go way back and spent a lot of years together doing music, and was I still to this day call him, depending on who I'm talking to, I call him a mentor, but I try to use that word loosely.
That's
as
awesome.
Primarily hung out, but yeah,
he's got all the gray hair to prove it.
Yeah.
All those phone calls. All those phone calls.
It's gonna be that kind of show. Okay, I like it.
Hey, you know what? Tony is the one that usually dishes everything out, but I think, I'm feeling kind of lucky today.
How so?
I'm fine. Moving on.
You feel like I can just? Well, I'll go as
Tony. What?
Listen, I would be remiss if I didn't tell my favorite Jadon Lavik story.
Okay, do we have time for this? That's the question. Do we
We
have
have
time?
time. Jadon and I went to Ecuador
yes.
together for a couple weeks, and one of the last things we did was we climbed a volcano there. It was I can't remember. Was it like 18,000 feet or something crazy?
No.
And one of the hardest things I've ever done, because there is no oxygen up there, and I remember taking like 2 steps and feeling like I was going to die. But we finally made it up to the top, so I was very proud. And then this was before we all had, instant digital cameras.
Right.
So I had a little camera with film in it and handed it to our Jadon. Jadon got in position, and I took this awesome picture of Jadon at the top of this volcano. with the sign that's, shows he made it to the summit and this great expanse behind him. And I took this picture, and it's a beautiful testament to his accomplishment. And then I handed him the camera, and then I got in position. And then we, traveled back to the States, and I got the film developed. And when I got them back, his photo, like I described, was this awesome testament to his accomplishment at the top of this massive volcanic peak in Ecuador. And when I got mine, it was a picture of my torso and blue sky behind me.
That's incredible.
And nothing else. So you might as well have taken that photo in the Target parking lot.
Is now a good time to tell you that I did that intentionally, or should we just let the story live on?
Well, how about we make that for another episode? So speaking of those episodes, thanks for sharing that story. That was the summit of my day today. Thinking about Tony's torso. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that. Last episode, we had Sarah Kelly on, and we were talking about songwriting beyond the pen and paper. But when it comes to partnering in worship in terms of leading as a team, speaking predominantly about between the worship leader and the pastor, how do we make that go beyond just the task or just the job? Because as you know, leading worship, leading a church is not just by solo. However, when we try to do things on our own, it will never be as strong as without the help of others. So as worship leaders and pastors, how can we work through our differences to make a difference for others? That is our topic today. So Tony, let's go with you on the first question. How do we partner as a lead pastor and a worship leader together? What are the best ways?
Well, I mean, ultimately, the pastor of a church is he's the shepherd of that flock, and he's the one with the staff guiding those sheep, so to speak. So it's really the pastor's vision for that church that has to take precedence. And of course, there needs to be a team that speaks into that, and a board of directors and the rest of the staff. Everybody should have a role speaking into that. But ultimately, if you are not aligned with the vision of your pastor, you're at the wrong church. And that's, the harsh thing is you got to think about you might be in the wrong job, and you may have to leave your job if you can't align yourself with the pastor. So really the difference is this really isn't an issue when you have a worship leader who is aligned with the vision of the pastor. Then there's not really, we don't even have to ask this question. It becomes a natural way of doing things, that everything you're doing is aligned. The conflict comes when the worship leader or any other staff member has opposition to the pastor, or to the pastor's vision. It's not saying that the pastor is always right in any way, but and again, that's where wisdom and counsel speaks into that. But ultimately, that to me is the answer to the question. That really, the question is, are you aligned with the pastor of your church? If you're not, you may be in the wrong place.
Right. Good word. Jadon, what's your thought on that? How do you see things with your ministry and?
Well, I totally agree with Tony, and unfortunately, I happen to be at a church where we do have shared vision between myself. I'm a worship arts pastor with my lead pastor, and so we have a pretty good relationship. I thought maybe for today's topic, I could speak into some more of the practical, useful tips that I've found recently. That honestly, we've just been on a journey at our own church of kind of discovery in terms of what this can be as a staff. We've transitioned as a church from just kind of pulling off a good service to now thinking about how can we make a service as meaningful as possible, and not creating any kind of divisive wall or segmentation to the flow of a service, and really looking at the entire service as a holistic thing, between the teaching and the worship time and response time and whatever elements consist of a worship service, but really looking at that as a holistic thing and how they can complement one another. And so just a couple practical things that we've been really diving into as a church are, really making and prioritizing a midweek meeting with our lead pastor to know specifically where the message is going to go, not just a passage, but specific points and how those points are going to be emphasized, so that we can really stack hands on a solid theme and really work together towards creating a service that really is holistic and one and the same. And part of that, like to Tony's point, is really just understanding and defining what worship music or praise music is, and and also aligning that with what the goal of the teaching time, and just making sure that that view is the same. And that's how we approach it at our church, and I really think it's been good because we've been able to stack hands not only on the content of the teaching, but really look at ways that the music can help support that. And we do kind of an interesting thing. I've noticed more and more churches are doing this now, is spending more of the time in music or worship and praise on the back end in response to the message, and really looking at that as a time when we can kind of, we've dealt with the head level, now maybe we can deal with the heart level, so to speak. That's obviously a generalization, but really driving into
that seems to be a new, maybe not a new thing, but new to some people, about having the worship on the back end as a response. I love that. Can you speak a little bit more into how did you guys partner with that to make that happen?
I think it was just like I was saying. I think just philosophically, what is worship? Defining worship. What's the goal of the teaching? And we're not just called to acquire knowledge, but we're called to do something with it. And so, really looking at that time, we got 60 to 90 minutes as a people to meet together and be challenged in the Word. But then also look at what does that mean? How do we respond? And so, it's really a transition that we've made into not only teaching and be hearers of the Word, but to immediately transition into being doers of the Word. And so we found that response time can be really neat. We're exploring some new ways, and I'm not saying by any means we've arrived as a church, but we're definitely engaged in this discussion of, what does it look like to have time for corporate prayer, while the music's going on. And so we've kind of built up and trained some leaders to respond in that time, and just things like that, where communion, obviously some reading of Psalms or even liturgical stuff can be really powerful if used to really support. So
So let's get back. I love that. Let's get back to the transparency. When you're responding on the back end. Let's talk about that itself. When you're in the moment of leading worship and we're dealing with transparency, how important is that between the worship leader and the pastor? Tony, can you speak on that first, and Jadon, then we'll get you.
Can you rephrase that or just restate the question?
Restating, how do we maintain a level of transparency? How important is that between the worship leader and pastor during the service of worship?
Well, I think the bigger picture is transparency is sort of important across the board in church,
Right.
If that's not being modeled with the two most visible leaders of the church, then I think there's a much bigger issue at hand. Transparency is a weird word, so I just want to make sure I understand the definition of what you're talking about. Are you talking about communication? Are you talking about vision, direction, or what's that?
Just modeling. How can we model transparency when others see us leading worship? If the pastor is standing like this, during worship, arms folded, or when the worship leader is done with the set and they check out and they leave the room.
Right. Well, again, I mean, all of this comes back to me. The whole issue of the pastor and the worship leader really comes down to alignment for me, and all those things are just a factor in whether or not those two people are aligned in how they do things. My one of the guys I consider one of my life pastors, Dr. Rod Collins, when we would do a worship set, he was always first one in his seat, front row, and was the loudest worshiper with his horrible voice and everything. I mean, he was just on fire, never missed a note. And then I've also been with pastors who spend their time in the back room and come out after the music's done and all of that. It's two different, and I try to be careful not to judge that based on appearances. The pastor who's not participating that way in a service in front of you may have the most intense worship time before he shows up to church. Their worship experience is different. I actually love being around kind of a Pentecostal church, but I'm not a very emotive, physically emotive guy myself. I love being around it. I love that energy. I love that spirit. But if you were to watch me, that's not me. So my hope is that in that situation, people aren't looking at me and thinking I'm detached or I'm not participating. It's just not how I participate. So I try to be careful not to judge from those kinds of appearances. But I do think, the alignment of the pastor and the worship leader, and really establishing policy too. I mean, those are kind of key things. If you don't have established policy, we had a rule at one of my worship teams at a previous church. We had 2 services, and it was basically required that everybody in the worship team would sit through a service, one of those 2 services, but we had to let the congregation know, because everybody would choose the first one so they could leave during the second one and go home. We had to let the congregation know in the second service they sit through the first one. So when you see them leave, please don't think that they're not part of it. So establishing that kind of policy and communication, I mean, that's a level of transparency and communicating to the whole congregation.
Right.
What policies are, what the expectations are. I don't know if that exactly answered the question. Again, transparency is kind of a wide word.
In a roundabout way, it did.
Well,
can you speak into that, Jadon? How's that handled at your church?
I'm like Tony. I totally agree. I'm a little more reserved personally in my emotional expression, especially when, as a worship leader, I go to visit other churches, and I'm more of an observer a lot of times and participating at more of a maybe intellectual or internal level sometimes, but not to say I don't have moments of intense worship on my own, but I prefer in just visual presentation, obviously a pastor that engages and has some sort of visual connection with what's going on in the worship time, even if they're not a creative type or lover of music per se, but like Tony said, I think he said it well, just not being critical or judgmental in any way in terms of issues of the heart. We'll leave that to the Lord. But I wanted to speak into another layer of this that I think is valuable. I'm envisioning a lot of worship leaders and team members listening to this podcast primarily. What's that?
That's not happening.
Yes. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking, they may be asking the question, well, how can we improve on this, alignment stuff, with the lead pastor or whatever? And I'll just share from my own experience. Like, I just personally feel like I have a duty or a sense of responsibility to reach out or somewhat engage with my lead pastor outside of work on some level, and I found that to be intensely valuable. I enjoy surfing. Me and my lead pastor once in a while will get out and surf and do something totally unwork related, just so there's substantial real relationship there. It's not manufactured or obligatory or any of those things, and it's genuine. And I've seen a lot of fruit from that. I wouldn't say we're best friends, but I would say that we have a good time and an authentic relationship together, and I think that can be really valuable and go a long way in terms of the authenticity just oozing out of us when it comes time to do our jobs and executing a service and being present. So,
and the Bible's actually really clear. I mean, if you've got issues with somebody, especially your pastor, you're not to take the worship stage until that's resolved.
Right.
And that's how many of us have gone up on a Sunday morning with some grievance against our pastor, and yet we totally ignore the scripture that tells us we're not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah, and ultimately that does affect the leading of our worship, because it is present in our minds, and if we're trying to be transparent, you're going to have a really hard time. I mean, Tony, that's a good word. We got a viewer question. I'd just like to insert this real quick. This comes from S. Zakat. She says, while I'm not having any real issues with my pastor, as I've been in this church for many years, and he has come to trust me, sometimes I would like a little bit more interaction and communication. He is supportive in his activities with the music department, and of course I like that, but I believe the longevity has helped to develop trust on both sides. So she's looking forward to hear what Jadon, what you have to say about that.
What was the specific question in there? Did you find one?
Yeah, there really wasn't a question. She just said that she wants a little bit more interaction and communication. I kind of feel what she's saying there. I mean, how can worship leaders develop a better sense of communication with their pastors?
I'm not sure. I can speak into my own experience. I have seen a lot of value in just having something on the calendar
Yeah.
week to, with my lead pastor.
Yeah.
Apart from a staff meeting,
Yeah.
meetings get lumped in with a bunch of other agendas. But to have it 15, 30 minutes, an hour of your pastor's time throughout the week to really lock arms on what's going to happen on Sunday, or that's valuable. And like I just shared with the kind of the relational component, sometimes that's tricky if it's male female, but some sort of opportunity throughout the week in, week out, to be developing and cultivating relationship. As for communication, I think we're all married. We understand the challenges there. I mean, it's just
Right.
I think it's just work. It depends on who that person is and who you are. But over communication rather than under just seems to be the ingredient there for me. But what are your thoughts, Tony?
Well, whenever I get asked that a lot also, and I always try to turn it around this way and just say, well, have you talked to your pastor about that? And you'd be surprised how often the answer is, well, no.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of times the pastor may not know that you have this unmet need that, is kind of their responsibility or that falls on their plate. So if you haven't gone to them and said, in order to do my job, I need to, and to really align with you, I need to be with you each week or hear from you each week in this way, it may just click for them. They're like, oh, yeah, of course, we should have thought of this a long time ago. So if you haven't asked for it, go ask for it. If the answer is no, that falls back into the are you aligned with your pastor thing. And, you need to be at a place where you can do your job and be aligned with what they're doing. And if they're not willing to let that happen, so again, this whole issue always comes back to that to me. Are you aligned with your pastor? Yeah. And that alignment isn't just philosophically and biblically. It's in how you work, how you do your job, how you're equipped to be a good worship leader, how they're equipped to pastor you as a worship leader. I mean, all these things fall into it. It's a very crucial relationship.
Let me just one quick thing that sparked my memory on that, Tony. At my experience at this church I'm at now, our church has been growing. It's been kind of a vibrant season, and so, just in the season of busyness, we haven't done what we call at our church an annual review amongst staff. And in my structure, my lead pastor would sit over me, and we would talk about my role and how's it going. Just a simple how's it going. We have a little form we use, but talk about. And I'm surprised in asking other worship leaders if they do that, how many of them do not. And so I actually initiated this recent one because it had been 3 years that we had gone on staff without any kind of review. I think the assumption was, hey, people are coming, things are great. And you'd be surprised what kind of conversation comes out of just simply putting something on the calendar with a little piece of paper that asks a few questions, and all of a sudden your job can take, I'm a creative type. I was, through that discussion, figured out that I need to carve out more time to be writing, to be practicing, and my job had kind of gotten lumped into some other responsibilities that were outside of what I was originally intended to be hired for. And so just a meeting like that, maybe it's 6 months, maybe once a year, just so that you guys are aligned and that relationship is not old or stale or
I think that's crucial, and it's also one of your responsibilities to the team under you. The people that you shepherd and are over, they need that same thing from you as the leader.
Right.
Great.
Right. Good. All right. Awesome, guys. Well, Jadon, folks can find your stuff at jadonlavik.com and also on iTunes. You still have your latest EP up there?
Yeah. And I guess that's the best place to go these days, probably iTunes or my website. But yeah, my season right now has been primarily at the church and juggling kids, and when I get out to do a concert or release some songs, that's a plus. So.
And actually, you can download all of Jadon's music for free at TonyGuerrero.com.
That's good. That's good. Well, we want to thank you, Jadon. Thanks so much again for being with us today and sharing your heart. Really appreciate that, bro. Nice meeting you.
Absolutely, anytime.
And we're going to have you back, too. So we've had a lot of fun today. Wish it can go longer. Tony, as always, man, thank you so much for bringing Jadon on.
Great to see you, Jadon. We've got to do lunch.
All right.
Cool. And guys, be sure to check us out on the next episode. We're going to be having Dwayne Moore coming up, and also Ross King, and we're going to have a little bit more of Jadon Lavik. So be sure to check us out with that, and you can also find us at worshipteamtraining.com. If you would like to send in a comment, at worshiptt. And also check us out. We have our mentoring programs, our workshops, and also our new university that's being kicked off. So stay tuned with us next on April the 29th for our next episode with Dwayne Moore. So guys, blessings to you, and we'll see you back at the next Worship Team Hangout. See ya.